Welcome to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. The Alumni podcast where you get to hear the inspiring stories and transformation that DVC has had to offer its alumni. And now, on with the episode.
All right. Okay. And we are live here at DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next. And we have here Chef Aaron. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. Yeah, Chef Aaron Prater. I'm the faculty chair for the hospitality department. This is my 4th year and excited to be here.
Cool. Well, we're actually very excited to have you here too. And not just on the podcast, but I know you brought a lot of change to the program. But let's talk briefly about how you got here.
Sure.
So where'd you grow up?
I was born in New Orleans, moved from there at about 10 years old, but my family, extended family is still down there. Grandfather was still down there, owned a shrimp boat. I'd spend my summers down on the Gulf Coast on a shrimp boat and, just immersed in that food culture. Graduated high school in the Kansas City area, lived in that area for a while, joined the Marine Corps, spent time as a journalist, about 7 years in the Marine Corps, traveling around Asia and Australia. And in that world, I was, when you're a journalist in the Marine Corps, you don't get like a chow hall card like everybody else. You have to like feed yourself, because typically, Marines go out, they do their job in the morning, then they take a break and they go to lunch and they come back and do their job. We would go out with the Marines in the morning and follow them, take pictures, record stories, whatever. And then while they went to lunch, we would go write the story. So we would have to kind of fend for ourselves when it came to food. So we got a stipend to kind of fend for ourselves. And I would spend my time going to the markets in Thailand or Hong Kong or Japan or wherever I was, trying the local food and local ingredients and things like that. And in that process, I discovered beer. I really, really wanted to be a brewer. When I got out of the Marine Corps, that was my dream, was just to work in a brewery. And I could not get a job to save my life anywhere. So I ended up taking a position as a marketing and brand manager for a wine import company that specialized in Australian wine. And it was just a rabbit hole that I dove headfirst into. Studied a lot, got my certified specialist in wine, my level 1 sommelier certification, named top 10 wine minds in Kansas City. Really loved that, but I hated chasing a sales goal. So I found myself spending more time in the kitchen talking to the chefs than out front talking to the manager trying to sell wine. So one day I just quit and went to culinary school. Yeah. And loved it. Fell in love with, I knew I loved food already because of my background, but really just loved the kitchen. But I had always avoided college. And so I went to a community college program similar to what DVC has. And I'm a huge proponent of the community college model, and I'll explain that in probably nauseum, right? But we had an apprenticeship model where you went to school full time and you cooked full time. And my first chef that I apprenticed under told me, he said, "Look, if you're going to spend 3 years in school and 3 years in kitchens, choose a different kitchen every year, because I'm going to teach you everything you need to know from me in that first year. And then I'm going to stop teaching you and just treat you like a worker." So I really took that advice to heart, and I soaked up everything I could from him, and then I moved on. And my second teacher was a really interesting one. He happened to be a culinary professor from France. His wife was an English teacher in France and did like a teacher exchange with a French teacher in Kansas City, swapped houses and lives, and he took a sabbatical and came along for the ride. So I had my own personal French chef, culinary instructor that I worked with every day for a year. And I would come in, I would ask, "Hey, how do I make coq au vin?" The next day he would bring in a recipe, and then we would make it together. And then the next day he'd say, "Okay, make it, go. You have an hour." And he would time me and push me every day. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. And I really, really loved it. And so after I graduated from culinary school, I was like, I think I want to be a teacher. I think that experience was great. And I was a terrible student. I hated school. I love learning, but school was never where I felt super comfortable in high school. So I went to France and I spent some time with Chef Florian and saw him teaching in the classroom. I was like, this is what I love. This is what I want to do. And so I really just refocused my education. I came back to the States. I applied and got a job at a high school, taught high school for a year, realized high school is not where I want to be. Found an opportunity at a community college and taught there for about 10 years and loved every bit of it. Just love sharing the weird, obscure, trivial knowledge of food, but also the how-tos and the whys, and to see that moment when a student understands what's happening and they get it, and they move from just copying what they're doing or just reading a recipe to creating and understanding that knowledge. And I realized that if I was going to be advocating for them to go to school, I should too. So I went back to college, got my bachelor's degree, and also worked towards a master's degree in sustainable food systems. And just really, really fell in love with the model of the community college education. So much so that the program I was at didn't have an opportunity for promotion because that school didn't allow for a chair in CTE programs. And so I couldn't be a faculty and be a director or a chair. So I looked for opportunities to move to a college that had that. And DVC was the first one I applied to and the one that I got.
Wow.
But I got some others, but the DVC was the one that I really wanted.
Yeah.
So I came out here to teach at this program to be responsible.
Wow. That's quite a trail, and it's not uninteresting.
No, there's a lot of twists and turns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I see where you fell in love with food. I mean, it's like I used to travel a lot for work, unrelated to the kitchen and so anytime I went someplace, it was always, go find the locals, and it's like, where's the best place to get? And then find out there's some obscure little place that, your life feels threatened if you go to, but
food's great.
The food's amazing.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just, I've kind of gotten to a point where I feel like that's almost the standard for great local.
Well, right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I do love New Orleans. I've only been there once, and the food was just amazing.
It's such an interesting culture because while there are pockets of I guess Native American cuisine, not Native American, but Native U.S. cuisine. You've got some elements of like the pastrami sandwich in New York, or you've got, the Italian beef in Chicago. New Orleans is the only place that has like a true food culture that is born and bred there and distinctive of that place. And there's a lot of reasons for that. So there's nothing like it in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I do like the barbecue in Kansas City also.
Well, that's because it's the best.
Well, it depends. It depends. We could argue for hours about that. So that's an amazing road getting here.
Yeah.
I love that you fell in love. Well, and I think your comments about not being great in school, not loving school until later.
Yeah.
Is, I think, the story of DVC, because there's a lot of students that come here. I mean, I had Casey on earlier, and I got to put that podcast up, but he's an example of that, where it's just later on in life, you go, gosh, I have now found what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so then you figure out a way to make it work. So,
well, I think that's the great thing about the community college model is the barrier to entry so low. It's easy to explore. It doesn't have the sort of overwhelming, like, oh, I have to figure out my future right now. And you also have just a tremendous amount of faculty who are so passionate about what they do, about the teaching aspect of it, that it's really fun to be a student at a community college, because you get the opportunity to see and hear and do so much that I didn't get at the 4-year level or grad school level as much as I did at the 2-year level.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things about DVC. It's the place where you get to find out what you want to be.
Right.
And so you take these classes and it's like, well, gosh, I'm pretty sure I don't want to do that. And you can change it. It doesn't cost you $1 million, or you don't have to make that call to your parents going, hey, guess what? I'm changing my major again. Yeah,
exactly.
And I remember getting those calls from my daughter, and I was just like, oh, pick one, kid. But yeah, it's the thing. So you got here, and I know that, so you got here during COVID.
I got here
just post-COVID.
Just post-COVID, sort of like right as things were opening up was my first year.
Okay. And that must have been interesting because I know all of, well, I can't imagine trying to do culinary school by Zoom.
It's impossible. I know that before I got here, I know DVC had tried to keep education going distance, but one of the things that is really important about that people understand about the way that we teach. I'm not teaching you how to cook. I'm teaching you how to cook professionally. Your home stove is never going to get as hot as a commercial stove. Those pans that you have don't work the same way. The way that we set up the kitchen for commercial cooking is not the same way that you set up your home counter for cooking. So we can send you home with ingredients and we can give you recipes, but then you're just learning how to cook at home. You're not learning how to cook professionally. So it is a fundamentally a model that does not work 100% distance. Mm-hmm. And I firmly believe that. So yeah, I came here right as we were sort of coming back to campus.
Yeah. So you really had the opportunity to take kind of almost a clean slate and in a lot of ways. And so what was that transition like?
Well, I moved into a department of me. There was no one here. We had some adjuncts who were amazing, and I really leaned on them a lot. In fact, Dave Crave is still here doing great work for us.
I think he's been here forever.
Yeah.
So,
but yeah, it was hard. I was teaching every class that we offered. I was here 13 hours a day. Our old model was also a production-based model, so the students were in class 5-6 hours at a time. And so we were running class from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Oh my God.
3 days a week, 4 days a week. And so I was here in the classroom 13 hours a day. And that had been built on sort of a need to feed people. But we pulled away from that because there's some fundamental flaws when you start trying to teach that way, because it becomes an exploitive model where the students become free labor and you start paying attention to sales, not learning. And so, one of the mottos we've accepted in our department is food is a byproduct for us. Our product is the student. The food that the students make is then a byproduct. If we can turn that into a way to make some revenue, if we can turn that into a fun pop-up or something, great. But that comes after we teach them, right? Mm-hmm. Teaching is what we're here to do. So we reshuffled the entire curriculum to make it more student-centered and individual learning-centered, while at the same time we were rewriting the entire curriculum as well. So we were teaching out what we had, but in sort of, square peg round hole sort of thing, while we were writing everything. And so this year is the first year that the new curriculum has been unveiled, because that's a 2-year process to get it through all the approvals and everything, let alone the writing and the understanding. So, and in that time, we've since hired a couple more adjuncts. We've since hired a couple more full-timers. So we've got Chef Christine Chang and Chef Oscar Cabezas, who are godsends. I couldn't do what I do without them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I know that when I started here, gosh, it's 3.5 years ago. One of the things I noticed is the Norseman, which, I go back to DVC back when the Norseman was this funky building way over there, mm-hmm. and it's now much better, by the way.
Thank you.
But it was only open in the fall or the spring, because you had to have students learn it enough to. And I was like going, oh, okay,
yeah. And that's sort of the model we're going back to. So we will be open in the fall, but since we had to shift all the curriculum around, we had to sort of build the students back up to where they're capable of operating. I could put them all in the kitchen now and say, make this, do this, let's serve this. But again, that doesn't teach them the way that they need to learn. So we're it's a stair-step model where they build on everything to the point where that's more of a capstone, where they're employing all their knowledge of, food and beverage and pastry and service and hospitality and purchasing and all those things together to create a restaurant experience. And if we put the restaurant experience at the front, they don't have the context for it. Mm-hmm. For it to really sink in and matter.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm thinking back to learning cooking. So when I started trying to learn how to cook. This is before the Cooking Channel and all that stuff. There was only PBS. And I remember seeing, by the way, I had a hard time cooking Uncle Ben's converted rice.
Sure.
So it was just, that and the mac and cheese, Kraft mac and cheese, and that was a bit of a struggle. It was a bit of a stretch for me. But I remember I saw this chef, Michael LaMonaco, and he owns a restaurant under the Brooklyn Bridge. And he said something, he was on PBS, and he said, if you learn a recipe, you've learned one dish. If you learned a technique, you've learned 1,000 dishes. And I really took that to heart to a point where, I took way longer than if I'd taken a culinary class, but it's like I'll bump into something that's interesting, like a flavor or something, like, oh my gosh, I could do this and this and this and this with it. And I found it to be a much more interesting culinary journey, which is kind of like I do barbecue. Yeah. When I say barbecue, I mean the actual, smoker. Yeah. We'll talk real barbecue. Yeah. But unlike barbecued shrimp in New Orleans, which I learned is not that same thing, but it's good. Yeah, not at all. But yeah, that's been a whole thing. It's just like learning that first step to then build on top of that, which sounds like a much better model.
Well, and that's really, we're a college, we're here to impart knowledge, and that's really our focus is we're teaching you, the contextual things about food, not just how to cook. In fact, culinary schools forever have done a really good job teaching the how to cook an egg, how to sear a steak, how to saute mushrooms. What we're really trying to do with our new curriculum is add the whys.
No.
Why to cook that? Why to pick that cut of meat to cook that way? Why to cook that egg that way for that dish? And that comes from, one, understanding those techniques, but then contextualizing those techniques with, the information of like the social or the environmental or the economic impacts of those things, and how did that cuisine develop? One of the reasons New Orleans has such a unique food culture is it's fairly old, but also has been isolated a few different times and had such different influences that it was sort of this little pocket. Whereas the rest of the U.S., we kind of grew up and developed our food culture around the same time as Transcontinental Railroad, around the same time as refrigeration, and so we've never had to ask the hard question of, well, what does Pleasant Hill taste like? Right? We don't know, because no one's ever had to ask. Because what do you put on your pancakes?
Yeah, well, maple syrup.
Everybody does. What's the maple trees around here?
Well, they're not here.
Exactly, right? And why? Why aren't they here? We can plant maples, but to get sap to run, you need extreme cold. And so everybody loves syrup. And so we import that syrup from Vermont or Canada or wherever down here. And so even though, that it doesn't live around here and the food didn't develop around here, we've never had to find us a local solution because we've always had that convenience. And so American food culture is really unique in that way.
It's in some ways kind of homogenous.
Yeah, it is.
And to your point about New Orleans, I hadn't thought about it being so isolated, but it's like basically you have these times where everybody showed up and then stayed. And then they got cut off. So like there's the Cajuns, which came from Acadia, and then you have the Creole, and then you have, and then you have a mishmash of variety of other people, and they all bring their, the African cultures and stuff like that. And it makes for just an amazing bunch of food that tastes like New Orleans.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only other thing that's like that is barbecue. Yeah. Because you get very regional about barbecue.
Well, and if you go back to barbecue and where it came from, and how it developed, there's some really interesting stories there. That's part of that Creole culture. What we consider barbecue today was actually a process that was used by the Arawak and Taino Indians, which were the indigenous peoples in the Caribbean. And that was brought in through that Middle Passage Columbian exchange process that we love to talk about and show how did the plate that you're eating or the plate that you're cooking, in our case, how did that plate develop? Where did that come from? What are the influences? What was Italian food like before 1491?
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't have the tomato.
Yeah.
So we instantly associate Italian food to red sauce, but they existed for centuries without a tomato. So what does that food look like? Yeah. those are important discussions to add context. And I think having those discussions reinforces that fundamental technique and learning that the students have.
Well, yeah, and I hadn't even thought about what Italian food looks like before 1491. My father-in-law is Italian. My wife is Italian, and she actually is a pretty good Italian cook. And it's like one of those things where it's just, that's kind of a given, it's like Sunday sauce.
Absolutely. Sunday gravy.
Yeah.
Yep. Sunday gravy.
So, which is one of my favorites.
It's
every
fantastic.
chunk of meat that you got in the house in there, and then you boil it all day.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's important, but it also, I think, it highlights how homogenous American food is.
Yeah.
Right. Every little village in Italy has a different cuisine and a different wine and a different salami and a different cheese. One, because they all hated each other, but two, because you didn't have roads or bridges to get you across that river or through that mountain. And so they had to develop something. We don't have to. We can just say, oh yeah, ship us another case of maple syrup.
Yeah, well, we can, in some ways, with the Italian cuisine, it's like we thank Chef Boyardee, which he actually brought Italian cuisine to the masses here tonight. So we got to thank him for that, even though people make fun of this canned. Hector
Boyardee was a very important piece of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of cuisine and stuff, you've done amazing things in the program. You have an upcoming event.
Yeah. So Alere, we're in our second year of Alere. This is our food and wine symposium. And we call it a symposium because, again, we're in the business of teaching. Fundamentally, that's what we value. And, as part of a community college system, we think it's the greatest asset any college has is this amazing brain trust of all these faculty. And we wanted to share that we want to have these types of conversations. We want to share with the broader community at large. And so it's your typical food and wine event where we've got tables of wineries that have been very gracious to donate their product and tables of food from these amazing vendors that are going to be there working with our students. And then we also have, some student tables where the students are making food, so you get to see the student food. But sort of off to the side, but I think just as important as all of that is a series of interdisciplinary lectures that we're pairing chefs and winemakers with college faculty from other areas. So for instance, I'll be doing a lecture on oysters with John Freitag from marine biology, and we're going to talk about sustainable Northern California seafood, where oysters come from, how they live, and then what to do with them. And you're going to try oysters, but we're going to pair it with this beautiful unoaked Chardonnay from a winery up in Napa that has been a huge supporter of the program. And that's just an example of reinforcing that education for the students. Once they understand an oyster, they can do more things with it. And so we've got film studies professor Amber Shields talking about the movie Sideways, and we're partnering her with Duckhorn, which is a famous Merlot producer, to talk about how this narrative concept in the movie Sideways, or in the book Sideways, derailed the entire Merlot industry in the 2000s.
Really?
I went from selling cases of Merlot, hundreds of cases of Merlot a month, to selling maybe 2 cases of Merlot a month, and overnight. And everybody in the wine business knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? And all because of this one movie. So, that's an important thing for our students to understand. Why does Merlot not sell like it used to? Or why is Merlot not as popular, even though it's a delicious grape? And here's one reason why, or here's a major reason why. And so those are the sorts of things that we want to provide not only to the students, but also to the community at large, and see that hospitality and food, we're a truly interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary subject. And we value those contributions from those other faculty, and we want to share that with everybody, the community at large.
This sounds like a lot of fun. So
it is.
We will put a link to the event. When is the event?
It's Sunday, April 26th.
Okay, cool. So it's coming up. folks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I better get to editing.
Buy your tickets.
Well, we're going to get to that. So buy your tickets. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. I'll put it out on LinkedIn and stuff like that.
Perfect.
So I'll be excited. So what do you see after Alere? What's after that, and what do you see as the future for the culinary program at DBC, the hospitality program, I should say?
Yeah. So we changed from culinary to hospitality for a couple reasons. One, the broader umbrella that we're sort of categorized under is hospitality. Culinary is a subset of hospitality, but also, we have a baking and pastry program. We have an associate's degree for transfer that's food and beverage based, and those are not culinary programs. So culinary is only a part of what we do. We're this bigger thing. So hospitality encompasses that. But also hospitality is a philosophy. We're welcoming nurturers, and I want that to infuse our entire department, not just when we're opening to the Norsemen, but everything that we do. So we're moving to that hospitality name. Our new curriculum, we got a grant to do a zero textbook cost program, an OER program. So we've done away with textbooks. The faculty and I have written recipes and content for these courses. We'll be unveiling that for students next year. And so it'll be a complete package that brings in that interdisciplinary, but also, it's more global inspirations, right? All culinary schools have been focused on French food because French food it's the language of the kitchen, but the French are the only ones to codify cuisine. They're the only ones to say, here's how you do this. Here's what this is. Everybody else, you talk about your family, right? Who makes the best red sauce? Well, it depends on whose house you're in.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of books about Italian food, but there isn't like a definitive guide. And so one of the things that we've tried to do is bring in those global perspectives. We still teach the classic techniques and we still put it in the context of the French kitchen, but we add those other techniques of like, well, here's how they would do it in this country, or here's how they do it over here. Here's what the sofrito method looks like and how it differs in other places. And so that's an important piece to us because none of my none of my students, some of them are older than me. None of my students eat French food on a regular basis, come from a French background. They come from other places, and it's important to recognize the path that they took to get here and value the cuisine of their ancestry and heritage. And so that's the other thing that we're trying to do is have a more global perspective instead of just that classic Western European perspective, while bringing in those other ideas from other disciplines and bolstering education that way. We've got some fun projects. We've got our vending machine project that we're working on. We're still figuring out how to get those licensed appropriately because it's kind of a radical concept that people haven't done before. But soon people will be able to buy student food in a vending machine. And that'll be ready-to-eat foods, like little snacks and sodas that they make, or it could be like ready-to-eat foods like sandwiches and things, or it could be take-home food that you finish at home or you just heat up. So those are going to be really cool. We're going to keep doing Alere. We've got our international trips that we're starting to develop to take our students internationally to see some of these things. I got really fortunate to travel internationally as a young man, and it really helped shape my world view, and I don't think I'd be the same without it. We want to create that opportunity for our students as well. Long term, we'd love to develop a bachelor's degree. California is one of the few states in the country that allows for bachelor's programs at the 2-year level, but as long as they don't compete with CSUs and 4-year schools. And we really feel like we've got a program that nobody else is doing, and it would not be competition because no one's really offered a degree in culinary because no one's really done a rigorous discipline study of it. And we hope to sort of build that.
That would be amazing. That would be really good.
Well, there's a lot of chefs out there that have an associate's degree and would love a bachelor's, but they just don't see a path forward. There's a lot of people who went to culinary school that dropped out. There's a lot of opportunity out there that we see, that we value the work that they put in. And so we're looking at a competency-based education model that is paired with credit for prior learning. So maybe you didn't finish your associates, or maybe you finished your associates, but you've been working in a really high-end kitchen. You have a lot of advanced knowledge. You can bring that in, test it with us, show that you know that knowledge. We could apply credit, and we could get people back into college and graduated, hopefully, ideally with a bachelor's degree in the future for minimal time and minimal money.
That would be amazing.
Because we know the value of the work that they're doing.
Mhm.
It has value, you know, and you see that in other places. Other fields have that model, but no one's codified it here in hospitality and culinary yet. And
Not yet.
we're on the path. We're on the
Not
path.
yet.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for coming in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
This has been very entertaining. You have a much more colorful journey here than I had no idea.
Yeah.
So it was like, that's great. And we will post a way to buy the Alere tickets.
Perfect.
And we'll get this up as quickly as possible.
Great. Thank you.
Great.
Appreciate it.
All right.
We'll
Cool.
see you soon.
We'll see you.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in to DVC Alumni, where every story inspires the next, the podcast for the DVC Alumni Association. You can contact us at alumni@dvc.edu with any comments, and be sure to leave a like and subscribe to our podcast.